Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Think about all the electric vehicles you see increasingly filling our streets, or those massive solar parks that are popping up to power our city grids. The shift to clean energy really does feel like a modern miracle. But here's the catch. It is heavily, strictly reliant on pulling very specific, rare elements out of the earth. And for India, navigating this transition is creating a massive paradox. It's basically a precarious strategic tightrope, and it's bridging geology, geopolitics, and environmental preservation all at once.
To start things off with a pretty jarring reality, 100%. India is currently 100% dependent on imports for the critical minerals that are powering our future. We're talking about lithium, cobalt, and nickel. That means every single battery going into a new EV and every large-scale grid storage unit is entirely reliant on raw materials pulled from completely outside India's borders.
And yet, sitting right next to that total dependency is India's incredibly soaring ambition. We're aiming to achieve 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030. Now that is a transformative goal, no doubt about it. But here is the major friction point. Reaching that 500 gigawatt benchmark demands an absolute astronomical amount of those exact same imported minerals.
So let's unpack this first big piece of the puzzle, the green energy paradox, which really boils down to this state of extreme dependency.
This extreme dependency creates a profound strategic vulnerability for India's massive EV and renewable energy targets. The supply chain is just incredibly concentrated. Just to give you an idea, nearly 60% of India's cobalt oxide imports for the 2025 financial year are coming from just one single country, Finland. The rest, well, that largely comes from China and Germany. And to add another layer of complexity to the whole thing, China globally controls nearly 80% of all cobalt refining. So think about that. If there's a geopolitical shock, a trade dispute, or a supply chain disruption in just one or two specific countries, India's entire clean energy manufacturing pipeline could literally face an abrupt halt.
And this leads us to a truly staggering domestic paradox. On paper, India is actually sitting on nearly 45 million tons of cobalt resources. That is a massive geological asset. Yet, astonishingly, it produces absolutely zero domestically. Nothing. It's a striking contrast, and it's largely due to severe processing gaps. You see, the cobalt is mostly found as a byproduct of copper and nickel, but India just completely lacks the specialized, integrated refining infrastructure required to turn that raw ore into the battery-grade chemicals that manufacturers so desperately need. Which naturally brings us to our next major hurdle, the struggle to actually mine these resources domestically.
You're probably wondering, why can't India just rapidly dig these essential minerals out of its own soil right now? Well, consider the highly publicized 5.9 million ton lithium block in Jammu and Kashmir. When this was announced, it made international headlines, right? But when the government put it up for auction, it completely failed to attract a single successful bid. And not just once, but twice.
So, what happened? The auction failures really stem from three major roadblocks. First, the deposits only had G3 level exploration. Now, in mining terms, that means it's a very early stage inferred resource, so high uncertainty. Second, these specific lithium deposits are hosted in clay formations, which are technically super complex and much more costly to process than the brine or hard rock deposits you'd find in places like South America or Australia. And third, potential investors were just deterred by the perceived political and regulatory risks associated with the region.
Stepping back a bit, we're looking at severe structural bottlenecks that span the entire sector. Geologically, only about 20% of India's potential has even been systematically explored. Then you hit the midstream. Like we mentioned with cobalt, domestic refining is practically non-existent. And finally, on the regulatory side, companies are facing incredibly complex environmental clearances and really strict social limits.
And those social limits bring us to a much deeper issue, the fierce collision between mining and nature.
There's a deep, underlying tension here, known globally as the green paradox. It's essentially the risk that accelerating mineral extraction for green technologies causes immediate, severe local environmental harm. It completely undermines the broader sustainability goals those exact technologies aim to achieve. In India's context, many untapped critical minerals lie directly beneath ecologically sensitive landscapes, dense forests, and tribal lands. So the rush to mine for clean energy runs the very real risk of destroying the very forests that act as our vital carbon sinks.
In community resistance, it is a tangible, powerful, and totally legal factor that simply cannot be ignored. A defining example of this is the Nyamgiri precedent. In this case, 12 tribal villages successfully utilized the Forest Rights Act to democratically reject a massive bauxite mining project. They based their veto entirely on spiritual and ecological grounds. This landmark event set a profound legal and social precedent. Any future critical mineral mining projects in India's forested regions are going to have to carefully navigate these exact same strict community consent laws.
Because digging at home is so fraught and slow, India has to look elsewhere. So let's talk about the global hunt and a fascinating concept called urban mining. So India is actively hunting for alternative sources overseas right now. The state-owned venture Cobalt is currently signing early-stage exploration deals, like a recent agreement for lithium exploration in Argentina. But to be honest, India's playing serious catch-up against global peers like Japan and China. While India's just now signing early-stage agreements, these other countries have spent literally decades locking down the global supply chain. They've been securing equity stakes, building state-backed guarantees, and in China's case, completely dominating cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But domestically, there is incredible, largely untapped potential right in our own backyards. We call it urban mining, specifically battery recycling. However, as recently as 2020, an unregulated, informal sector dominated a staggering 70% of the battery recycling market. And while this informal network is actually pretty great at the collection phase, they almost always lack the advanced technology to safely and efficiently recover these precious critical minerals. And that leads to massive environmental and safety risks. But the potential here is just massive. If India can properly formalize and scale this urban mining ecosystem under its new waste management rules, it could recover up to 60% of its critical mineral needs domestically by the mid-2030s. That is a total game changer. It shifts the entire narrative away from digging holes in the ground to recovering high-grade minerals directly from our own electronic waste streams.
So, how do we get there? Let's take a look at the 10-year roadmap to achieve true energy sovereignty. To transition India from a state of deep vulnerability to true energy sovereignty, the government's roadmap hinges on 4 really critical steps. Step 1, dramatically deepen early geological exploration. The Geological Survey of India is actually planning 1,200 new projects just to properly map the resources. Step 2, we have to build out that severely lacking midstream refining capacity, so the raw ore can actually be processed right here at home. Step 3, aggressively scale up formalized battery recycling, aiming for about 400 kilotons of urban mining. And finally, Step 4, strictly embed environmental, social, and governance safeguards into every single project to respect tribal rights and prevent that green paradox we just explored.
Ultimately, the most vital question, the one that is honestly going to define India's economic and environmental trajectory for the next century, is this. Can India actually navigate this complex roadmap to secure a green future without sacrificing its forests and communities in the process? It's a remarkably delicate balancing act of policy, technology, and human rights. Thanks for exploring this paradox with us today.